According to the Pew Research Center, about 67% of people polled between the ages of 18 and 29 have played video games. That being said, many of you in the audience may call yourselves gamers or have at least played video games. I myself am what I call a second-generation gamer and have been playing since 1991. Today I want to share with you preserving video games, how it has already impacted me, and how it could impact you if it remains the same. Libraries and museums are still working on how and what should be archived for video games, as the exemption to the Digital Millennium Copyright Act was added in 2006. In other words, they don't know if they should focus on hardware and software of the games, if they should include the artwork, note, and other influences from the author, and if the public should be allowed to interact with the archives to immerse and experience as originally launched or improved through emulation. In keeping the game alive, evaluating strategies for the preservation of console video games, Gutenberner, Becker, and Robert explain that preserving of video games is different from documents and objects, that each gaming platform itself provides a different challenge. But archiving console systems, game code, and the look and feel will help when comparing to other system types. And preserving video games is important as it provides a glimpse into the past and can shed light on cultures and events. Ignoring the presence of video games in recent American history is like ignoring the importance of television during post-war America. Hudgens in Preservation of Video Game points out that the archival of video games will be beneficial for academic institutes like IUPUI as game design is added as a study program. Thankfully, preservation efforts have already been made for video games. For example, in 2012, the Smithsonian American Art Museum had a video game exhibit called The Art of Video Games. Chris Melasinos worked with the museum and an advisory group that consisted of game developers, game designers, industry pioneers, and journalists to place 240 games on a ballot for the public to vote on between February 14th and April 17th of 2011. More than 3.7 million votes were cast by 119,000 people in 175 different countries. Only 80 video games were highlighted in the exhibit, with 5 games that were playable for the public that represented each era. Those that weren't playable had video footage and images of gameplay shown, as some of the exhibit items were fragile from age. Yes, video games can become fragile through data deterioration known as software rot, code rot, bit rot, or bit loss. Imagine that you start life with all your basic functions and can store a memory of an average of 20 years. But as you get closer to 2021, you begin to lose some of those functions. There's a gap that grows in your memory. You can't remember how to write. Next, you lose how to hold a pen. Letters in the alphabet are empty and meaningless to you. Before you turn 30, your life as a video game is over and you become a garbled mess of errors. That is the future of video games, especially the older ones on physical media like floppy disks, ROM cartridges, and optical media. One missing component of the code can make a game unplayable and the information stored irrecoverable. And the industry itself could be killing its own history as they push for the latest and greatest. My experience as a video game journalist showed the disparity in preserving video games by the companies when Blizzard Entertainment announced the original code for the massive multiplayer online role-playing game, World of Warcraft, was gone when they launched their third expansion, Cataclysm. The entire legacy code was written over. The database was reconstructed. Everything was lost. As a student minoring in game design and development, the preservation of video games is important and impacts me. I experienced the effects from the video game crash of '83 when Nintendo was the only company that kept the industry sustainable until other game companies developed consoles again in the late early to early 90s. My first console, the Sega Genesis, no longer powers on either from bit rot or faulty hardware. Perhaps I'm nostalgic, but it's why I want to become a curator or archivist of video games. This position doesn't exist outside of the game industry, and only a few of the companies are even keeping their own archives. I hope that with my major in applied computer science, I can replicate the limitations developers experience so to provide an interactive archive. Although most of your video games are saved online through online content media, this means that the code is saved on a server to be downloaded to your console hardware. It's in its memory along with the save file. To avoid any code errors, it needs to maintain a connection to the server for updates. Otherwise, you can't play your favorite video game. In fact, you may have experienced the loss of this connection a few years back. In 2014, around the holidays, the Xbox Live and PlayStation Network were down for 2 days due to a DDoS, distributed denial of service, attack. This resulted in the PlayStation and Xbox games being unplayable. You couldn't update your new game software because it required that connection to the server. In a way, this was your own experience to bit rot. The DDoS of the Xbox Live and PlayStation Network illustrate the potential risk if newer video games aren't archived as well. While older video games store their code in physical media, the online content video games could disappear forever if a company closes or the server is retired. And so I hope you've learned about the impact of preserving video games, not just for gamers, but for its influence on our history. The first steps in archiving video games has started thanks to the Smithsonian, American Art Museum, and the Art of Video Games exhibit. But there are more obstacles to overcome for their preservation. Without taking serious consideration into how and what to archive for video games, we may lose research materials for cultural studies and future game developers as more colleges add in the program, just like IUPUI's minor in game design and development. I'd like to leave you with a quote from one of my favorite video games, The Legend of Zelda: Ocarina of Time. "Time passes, people move. Like a river, it never ends. A childish mind will turn to noble ambition." Thank you.